There's a silent force inside you that sabotages your progress. It tells you to rest when you should act, to scroll when you should study, to delay when you should decide. But what if that voice isn't laziness? What if it's something deeper? Today, we're going into the unconscious roots of why you keep avoiding discipline, and how to kill that impulse once and for all. When people speak of discipline, they often imagine a rigid, mechanical routine forced upon the self, as if discipline is a weapon to be used against desire. They imagine a battle where their higher self must conquer the lower self, beating it into submission with sheer willpower. But this is not discipline. This is inner tyranny, and tyranny never lasts. It creates internal rebellion. Real discipline is something far more profound and far more sustainable. It is not the suppression of your desires. It is the transformation of them. It is the integration of chaos. Every human being carries within them the seed of chaos, a swirling energy of instinct, distraction, emotion, longing, fear, and creativity. This chaos is not the enemy. In fact, it is a source of great power. But when chaos is left unstructured, when it is not given a higher purpose or integrated into a larger vision, it leads to compulsive behavior, avoidance, and stagnation. The disciplined individual is not someone who has silenced this chaos, someone who has brought it into order, someone who has turned the wild horse of instinct into a focused path forward. They do not kill their desires, they harness them. To understand this fully, you must see that what we call discipline is not external control. It is internal alignment. Most people fail to stay disciplined because they are divided inside. One part of them longs for progress. Another part seeks comfort. One part wants clarity. Another fears what clarity will reveal. Discipline begins when you become aware of these parts, when you stop ignoring the inner tensions and start listening to the conversation taking place within your own unconscious. You cannot force yourself into discipline by pretending these contradictions don't exist. They will find a way to break through. Instead, you must learn to speak with them, to understand what the chaos is trying to express. What pain is it protecting you from? What past experience is it clinging to? What desire does it fear will never be fulfilled? The chaotic part of you is not the enemy of discipline. It is the raw material out of which discipline is born. Imagine trying to build a temple without bricks, the scattered pieces of your personality, your fears, your impulses, your unmet needs. These are your bricks. When you bring them into awareness, when you gather them with intention, they become building blocks. But when you try to suppress them, to push them into the unconscious, they sabotage you in ways you don't even notice. You think you're lazy, unmotivated, or broken, but what's actually happening is that you've declared war on your own instincts, and now you're bleeding from wounds you don't remember creating. This is why the disciplined life is not cold and emotionless. It is, paradoxically, the most human and alive life possible. It is the life in which all of your energies, desire, fear, creativity, aggression, joy, sorrow, are integrated into a clear and sacred direction. Discipline is not the erasure of passion. It is the ability to direct passion toward a purpose. The man who is disciplined does not feel less than others. He feels more, but with clarity. He burns, but he burns like a controlled fire that gives light to others instead of consuming himself in his own flames. The journey into discipline, then, begins with acceptance, not of weakness, but of complexity. You must accept that there are many voices within you, and each one is speaking out of a need to be heard. If you ignore them, they will create resistance. They will lure you into distractions, addictions, and patterns of self-sabotage. But if you listen, not to obey but to understand, you will begin to see the threads that run through your unconscious. You will begin to understand your patterns, and once you understand them, you can reshape them. Discipline is not the act of gritting your teeth every day and forcing your body to move. That is slavery to an ideal. Discipline is the act of aligning your inner world so that movement becomes natural. It is the art of becoming one whole person rather than a battlefield of conflicting desires. And wholeness is not sterile. Wholeness includes the wild. It includes the parts of you that want to sleep in, that crave chaos, that long for pleasure. But it transforms them by giving them something higher to serve. This is why true discipline often feels effortless. Not because it's easy, but because it's real. It's not an act. it's a state of being. You are no longer fighting yourself. You are using all of yourself. You are not denying the chaos. You are leading it. When you repeatedly fail to maintain discipline, the instinct is often to blame laziness, distraction, or lack of willpower. But beneath those surface-level explanations lies something far deeper, an internal fragmentation of the self. Discipline does not fail because you are weak, it fails because you are divided. What appears on the outside as procrastination is merely a symptom. The true cause is the absence of unity within the psyche. You are not operating as one cohesive being. You are a collection of inner parts moving in opposing directions. Every decision you make reflects the inner structure of your identity. When that structure is aligned, when the conscious self and the unconscious forces are in cooperation, action becomes effortless. But when they are at odds, discipline collapses. You make promises you cannot keep, set goals you never pursue, and find yourself trapped in loops of frustration and regret. This is not because you lack intelligence or motivation. It is because the self that sets the goal is not the same self that wakes up in the morning. One part of you dreams of greatness. Another fears what greatness might demand. One part of you desires transformation. Another clings to what is familiar and safe, even if it's painful. This is the essence of a fragmented identity, a psyche divided by unresolved tensions. These inner divisions often come from early life experiences. Perhaps you were taught to avoid failure at all costs, and now any challenge feels threatening. Perhaps you were conditioned to seek approval, and now you sabotage discipline because it might pull you away from the people who once validated your helplessness. Whatever the source, the fragmentation persists until it is made conscious. Without this awareness, you remain trapped in cycles of self-sabotage, mistaking the failure of discipline as a character flaw rather than a signal of inner conflict. Discipline requires psychological congruence. All the parts of your identity must align toward a singular direction. This does not mean uniformity. It means integration, even your opposing impulses. The part of you that wants rest, the part that seeks stimulation, the part that dreads responsibility, must be acknowledged and given a role in your forward movement. If they are repressed or denied, they will find ways to express themselves through subtle resistance. You'll notice it in your habits, a sudden urge to quit, an unexplainable fatigue, an attraction to meaningless distractions. These are not failures of will. They are eruptions of the unintegrated self. When your identity is fragmented, your energy is divided. You may begin your day with intention, but by mid-afternoon, the momentum vanishes. You may tell yourself you want to change, your behavior reflects otherwise. This internal contradiction creates a form of psychic paralysis. You are stuck between who you were and who you wish to become, and neither side feels fully real. You do not trust yourself because the self is not whole. And without self-trust, discipline has no soil to grow in. To become disciplined, then you must become one. You must excavate the unconscious material that splits your actions from your desires. You must bring into the light all the disowned parts of yourself. The part that still feels like a child, the part that fears failure, part that enjoys chaos. You must listen to these voices not with judgment, but with the intent to understand. Because each part of you, no matter how dysfunctional it seems, is trying to serve a purpose. It is trying to protect you, to preserve something important, even if it no longer serves you. Healing this fragmentation does not happen through force. It happens through dialogue, through self-inquiry, reflection, and emotional honesty. When you begin to understand why you resist the very things you claim to want, you begin to see that your resistance is not irrational. It is deeply human. It is the psyche trying to defend itself against perceived threats, even if those threats are simply change, responsibility, or the unknown. Once you realize this, you stop attacking yourself for your failures. Instead, you begin to work with yourself, to bring all your parts under a unified vision. A person who is internally unified does not struggle to stay disciplined because there is no longer an internal war. His energy is focused. His actions align with his goals because his psyche is no longer fragmented. He is not a divided self pretending to be whole. He has gone into the depths of his being, faced the contradictions, and emerged with clarity. This is the difference between surface-level discipline and rooted discipline. One relies on pressure. The other is born from integration. Discipline is not just a habit. It is the external manifestation of internal harmony. When all the fragmented pieces of you begin to speak the same language and follow the same direction, discipline no longer feels like a punishment. It becomes an extension of who you are. To understand why so many avoid discipline, despite knowing its value, we must look beyond the superficial. Discipline is often framed as a choice between action and inaction, success and failure, strength and weakness. Such framing misses the psychological reality that lies underneath. Avoidance of discipline is not just about laziness or lack of motivation. It is a deeply embedded defense mechanism that protects the individual from something far more terrifying than effort: the fear of transformation, the fear of becoming who one truly is. This fear is the fear of individuation. Individuation is the process of becoming whole, of integrating the unconscious into consciousness and stepping fully into personal authority. But this process is not gentle. It demands confrontation with everything the ego has buried, denied, or avoided. To become who you are meant to be, you must first destroy the illusions that have kept you comfortable. You must outgrow the patterns that once made you feel safe. Discipline is not merely a tool to achieve this transformation. It is the structure that makes transformation possible. And this is precisely why it is avoided, because to embrace discipline is to invite the death of the old self. The avoidance of discipline is therefore an unconscious refusal to face that death. The ego clings to its familiar identity, even if that identity is built on weakness, procrastination, and dependency. Discipline threatens this fragile construction. It forces the individual to take responsibility for their time, their energy, and their evolution. And responsibility, at its core, is terrifying, because it means there is no one left to blame, no one left to rescue you. It means you are the architect of your reality. For many, this level of responsibility feels like abandonment. It feels like being thrown into the unknown, stripped of excuses and distractions. So the psyche creates resistance. It masks this resistance with rationalizations. I'm tired. I work better under pressure. I'm just not ready. But these are not truths. They are shields protecting the ego from the disintegration it fears. When you choose discipline, you are not just organizing your day or sticking to a schedule. You are declaring a shift in identity. You are choosing to become a conscious actor in your own life. This threatens the unconscious parts of you that have become attached to your limitations. The wounded child in you may feel exposed. The inner rebel may feel suffocated. The part of you that survived through avoidance may feel betrayed. These parts do not vanish just because you desire change. They resist it with everything they have. And unless they are understood and integrated, their resistance will manifest as sabotage. The mistake people make is thinking that if they just push harder or use more willpower, they will overcome this resistance. But willpower cannot overpower the unconscious. It can suppress it temporarily, but the shadow always returns. Real discipline is not a fight. It is a reconciliation. It is the process of befriending the parts of yourself that are afraid to grow. You must look at your avoidance not with contempt, but with curiosity. What is it protecting? What part of you still believes that safety lies in stagnation? These questions reveal that your resistance is not the enemy. It is an unhealed story. There is also a cultural illusion that adds to this fear. We are taught to associate discipline with self-denial, rigidity, and repression. This misunderstanding arises only when discipline is imposed from the outside. True discipline is born from within. It is the voluntary submission to a higher order of self, a deeper truth. It is not about rejecting joy or spontaneity. It is about creating a foundation strong enough to support the full expression of your potential. It is not the prison of the spirit, but the container in which freedom becomes real. Individuation requires sacrifice. Not the sacrifice of your soul, the sacrifice of your false self. The self that was built from fear, compliance, trauma, and imitation. The avoidance of discipline is a desperate attempt to keep that self alive. But the longer you protect that illusion, the longer you delay your becoming. The truth is, most people are not afraid of hard work. They are afraid of what that work will awaken. They are afraid of no longer being able to blame the world, of no longer having the comfort of unconsciousness. They fear that once they become fully responsible, they will also become fully exposed. But this exposure is necessary. It is how the authentic self is born. Discipline, then, is not a punishment. It is a path. A sacred practice that forces you to confront your fragmentation, to leave behind the parts of you that no longer serve, and to rise into the integrated self that was waiting beneath the noise all along. Avoidance is not laziness. It is fear wearing a mask. And until that fear is seen for what it is, discipline will always feel like a threat instead of a doorway. At the root of all undisciplined living lies something hidden, something buried in the unconscious that most people never dare to confront. It is not simply the tendency to procrastinate, nor is it a surface-level lack of ambition or effort. These are only symptoms, reflections of a deeper, more elusive presence within the psyche, the shadow. The shadow represents the parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge, the aspects of your personality that you disown, suppress, or repress. In the case of discipline, the shadow often takes the form of self-sabotage, the internal saboteur who whispers reasons not to act, who drags you into distraction and convinces you that failure is easier than growth. To understand discipline is to understand that your failure to uphold it is not a matter of weakness, but of unconscious domination. The shadow is powerful precisely because it operates in the dark. It is not inherently evil, but it becomes dangerous when left unexamined. As long as you continue to avoid the reality of your own shadow, it will govern your behavior from behind the scenes. You will continue to repeat the same patterns, make the same excuses, and fall into the same cycles of regret and self-loathing. Each time you set a goal and fail to meet it, you will feel a little more broken, not realizing that it is not your conscious mind that is failing. It is your unconscious shadow that is pulling the strings. The person who avoids discipline is usually haunted by a deeper emotion: shame. Shame for not being enough, for never living up to expectations, for falling short. And shame is a core element of the shadow. Rather than confront this shame, the individual avoids the very conditions that would force them to face it: structure, routine, accountability, and growth. Undisciplined living becomes a fortress, a place where the fragile self hides from exposure. It feels safer to underperform than to try and risk the pain of failure. But this illusion of safety is a prison. The shadow keeps you small not because it hates you, but because it fears annihilation. And the only way to liberate yourself from its grip is to step directly into its territory. When you begin to observe your patterns honestly, when you track your avoidance, your escapes, your repeated emotional reactions, you start to catch glimpses of the shadow at work. You may notice how you delay important tasks, not because they're difficult, but because they confront you with the possibility that you're not who you pretend to be. You may see how you distract yourself with meaningless entertainment, not for pleasure, but to numb the ache of wasted potential. You may recognize how you feel an invisible resistance each time you try to do something that would move you forward. This resistance is not coming from nowhere. It has roots. It has a voice. And if you listen carefully, you can hear what it's saying. The shadow says things like, "Why bother trying? You're not worthy of success. You've failed before, and you'll fail again. No one cares what you do." These messages, though often subtle, form the core of undisciplined living. They whisper into your decisions, bend your will, and over time, they become indistinguishable from your identity. But the truth is, they are not you. They are distortions, psychological artifacts from your past, embedded in your psyche through pain, rejection, or confusion. The moment you separate these voices from your authentic self, you reclaim your power. Because the shadow can only control you while it remains hidden. Once you face it, name it, and understand it, it loses its hold. To face the shadow is not to destroy it, but to bring it into conscious alignment. This is the paradox of inner transformation. You do not eliminate your darker impulses, you integrate them. You see the part of you that is lazy, undisciplined, reckless, and afraid, and instead of pushing it away, you bring it under the rule of your higher self. You don't ignore the shadow, you lead it. You give it a role in your evolution, rather than letting it sabotage your path. The person who lives in discipline is not perfect. They are simply someone who has confronted their inner chaos and emerged with authority over it. It's important to realize that discipline is not something you impose on yourself like a tyrant. It is a natural result of psychological order. When you clean up the unconscious debris, the unmet needs, the unresolved fears, the shameful stories. You make space for clarity and focus. You stop being pulled in 1,000 directions. You stop needing external motivation. You stop treating every task as a battle. Discipline begins to feel like alignment, not effort. It becomes who you are, not what you do. And this shift is only possible when the shadow is no longer your master. The moment you bring light into the dark corners of your behavior, you begin to dismantle the unconscious patterns that have held you captive. You become aware of the roots of your resistance. You start to see how much of your life has been built around avoiding confrontation with yourself. But now, with your eyes open, you can choose differently. You can act not out of fear, but out of vision. You can live not as a victim of your impulses, but as a steward of your potential. The shadow is no longer a threat once you make it your guide. Because when you learn to understand the part of you that fears discipline, you are finally free to embody the version of you that desires greatness. The journey toward discipline is not a battle of will, nor a cold rejection of pleasure. It is a confrontation with the deepest parts of the self, the chaotic, fragmented, and hidden elements that have long operated in the shadows. The reason discipline feels impossible for so many is not because they lack strength, because they have not yet faced the unconscious forces within them that resist transformation. Discipline, in its highest form, is not the suppression of desire, but the unification of all desire under one clear and conscious aim. It is the result of psychological alignment, of becoming one within. When you begin to see that your failure to act, to commit, and to follow through stems from unresolved conflict within your psyche, you stop treating discipline as a mere tool of self-control. You start to see it as a doorway to self-integration. And as you explore the shadows, embrace the parts of you that have long resisted growth, and understand the fears that hide behind avoidance. Discipline ceases to be an obligation. It becomes a reflection of who you truly are when you are whole. The process is not easy. It is raw, uncomfortable, and at times deeply unsettling. But it is only by walking through the internal resistance that you begin to reclaim your will, not as a weapon of force, but as a compass guided by inner unity. Once you become conscious of what holds you back, those forces can no longer control you. And when they no longer control you, discipline flows not from pressure, but from power, not from fear, but from freedom, not from force, but from alignment. This is when you stop avoiding discipline forever, because you finally understand that you are not forcing yourself to change. You are finally becoming who you were always meant to be.